The moment the bank manager walked into that conference room and saw me sitting there, he stopped mid-step. His face went completely still, not the polite, composed stillness of a professional. Something deeper, something personal. He looked at me the way people look at a photograph they thought was lost forever. My daughter-in-law was in the middle of a sentence. She didn't even notice he had stopped. She kept talking, laying out her case to the junior associate beside her, all smooth confidence and rehearsed logic. My son sat next to her, eyes fixed on the table. He hadn't looked at me once since we'd walked in. The manager, a trim man in his 60s with silver at his temples, said nothing. He just looked at me and said quietly, almost to himself, "Is that her?" The room went silent. My daughter-in-law turned. My son finally looked up. The associate set down his pen. They had no idea what those 3 words meant, but I did. And I knew, in the way you know things when you've lived long enough, that everything was about to change. I want to tell you how I got to that room. Because it didn't start in a bank. It started with a casserole dish and a lie I almost believed about myself. My name is Cecile. I'm 68 years old, and I live in the same house in Ashford, Ohio, where my husband Walter and I raised our son for 31 years. It's a modest place, 3 bedrooms, a covered porch that faces west, a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and whatever was in the oven. After Walter passed 2 years ago, it became quieter than I ever thought a house could be, but it was still mine, still ours in every way that matters. I kept the same routines. Up at 6, coffee in the blue ceramic mug Walter brought back from a conference in Portland the year before he got sick. I'd sit at the kitchen table and watch the light change on the backyard, where his vegetable garden had mostly gone to seed by now, though I kept up the tomatoes because those he'd been most proud of. People who hadn't seen me in a while would sometimes say I looked well. I appreciated it, even when I didn't quite believe it. Grief is strange. It doesn't make you look the way you feel. My son Philip lived 40 minutes away in Cedar Falls with his wife Renata and their 2 boys. He'd always been close with Walter. They had that particular easy understanding between fathers and sons who share the same quiet temperament. After the funeral, Philip called regularly. We had dinner together once a month, sometimes more. I thought we were okay. I didn't see it coming. That's the honest truth. I didn't see it coming at all. It was a Tuesday in October when Philip called and asked if he and Renata could come over that weekend to talk. Something in his voice was different, flatter than usual, rehearsed in a way I recognized from when he was a teenager trying to hide something. I said, of course. I made pot roast. I set the table properly with the good cloth napkins. They arrived on Saturday, and Renata walked in without hugging me, which she always did. She went straight to the living room and sat down, crossing her legs and placing her hands in her lap like she was about to lead a meeting. Philip kissed my cheek but didn't quite meet my eyes. I brought in the coffee and sat across from them. "Mom," Philip started, and then paused and looked at Renata. She picked up from there. She was good at that, filling silences, taking charge. In small doses, I'd always admired it. "Cecil, we've been doing a lot of thinking about your situation." "My situation," I repeated. "Living alone in a house this size. It's a lot of upkeep, especially with your hip the way it's been." I'd stumbled on an icy step in February and needed physical therapy for 6 weeks. It had healed completely. I mentioned this. Renata nodded like I'd said something she'd anticipated. "Of course, but these things accumulate, you know, and Philip worries. We both do." She glanced at my son, who nodded without speaking. "There's a wonderful community just outside Columbus, Maple Ridge. It's beautiful, Cecile. Independent living, meals, activities. You'd have people around you." "And the house?" I asked, because I already knew. "We've actually spoken to someone already," she said, and she said it gently, the way you say something to a person you've decided can't handle the full version of the truth. "A realtor, just to get a sense of the market. It's a great time to sell. You'd have more than enough to cover Maple Ridge for years." I looked at my son. He was looking at the coffee mug in his hands. "It's a good plan, Mom," he said quietly. "We just want you to be safe." I thought about telling them I was fine. I thought about explaining, again, that my hip was healed, that I had friends in this neighborhood, that Mrs. Goodwin next door checked on me twice a week, that this house held 30 years of my life and my husband's life, and that there was nothing wrong with me that required a solution. I thought about all of those things. Instead, I said, I'd like some time to think about it. Renata's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course, but Maple Ridge does have a wait list, so we wouldn't want to wait too long. They left before dinner. Philip squeezed my hand at the door and said, It's going to be okay, Mom. I couldn't tell if he was saying it to me or to himself. That night I sat in Walter's chair by the window and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son and his wife had already talked to a realtor about my house. Without asking me, I thought I understood loneliness. I'd been learning it for 2 years, but this was something else. This was being erased while still in the room. 3 weeks later, Philip came back alone. He brought paperwork, a document from Maple Ridge outlining the admission process, and beneath it, tucked in like an afterthought, a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of the house. He said Renata had worked with their attorney on it. He said it was the simplest way to handle things. I looked at the deed for a long time. Philip, I said, your father died in this house. He didn't say anything. I need my own attorney to look at this. His jaw tightened just slightly. Mom, there's no need for that. Everything's been taken care of. Everything's been taken care of for me, I said. Without me. He left the papers on the table when he went home. I didn't touch them that night. I made myself tea and sat with the quiet and tried to remember who I was before someone decided I needed to be managed. The next morning, I was in Walter's office, which I'd left mostly unchanged since he passed, his books still on the shelves, his reading glasses still folded on the desk. I was looking for a document of my own, an old property tax record I thought I'd filed with his papers, when I noticed a metal lockbox on the bottom shelf of his closet. Dark green, small combination lock. Walter's birthday. I tried it first. It opened. Inside was a folder, organized the way Walter organized everything, with handwritten tabs and a small index on the first page. I sat down on the closet floor, right there among the shoeboxes and old winter coats, and I started to read. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking and the room had gone from morning light to noon. Walter had been careful in the way that quiet people sometimes are, not flashy, not obvious, but deliberate over decades. He'd bought a small commercial property in 1998 when the neighborhood east of Ashford was still undervalued. He'd held it, rented it, let it appreciate. He'd bought a second one in 2004. He'd invested steadily in index funds through a brokerage account I'd never known existed. He had a small portfolio of I-bonds he'd started in the early 2000s when inflation was on his mind. None of it was extravagant, but all of it together over 20 years of patience had become substantial. Far more than I would have imagined from a man who drove the same truck for 14 years and bought his dress shirts at Kohl's. At the bottom of the folder was a letter in his handwriting, dated 8 months before he died. My Cecile, if you're reading this, then you've found what I hoped you'd find. I'm sorry I didn't tell you while I was there to explain it in person. I kept meaning to, and then things moved faster than I expected, and I ran out of time. I built this for you, not for anyone else. For you, I know you. You would have told me to spend it, to enjoy it, to stop worrying. So I kept it quiet, and I kept adding to it, and I made sure it would be there when you needed it most. The account is at Hargrove Trust in Columbus. Ask for a woman named Sylvie Beaumont. She's been managing it for the last 6 years. She knows to expect you whenever you're ready. I also want to tell you something about Renata. I don't think she's a bad person, but I think she wants things, Cecile, and I think she'll want them at your expense if she has the chance. That's why I did this the way I did, so that the choice would always be yours. All my love, always, Walter. I read it 4 times. Then I pressed it against my chest and cried in that closet for a long while. When I was done crying, I washed my face, put on my good coat, and drove to Columbus. Sylvie Beaumont was in her late 40s, with the direct, unhurried manner of someone who'd spent decades handling other people's most important things without drama. She stood when I came into her office and shook my hand with both of hers. Mrs. Cecile, she said, Walter told me about you so many times. I'm honored to finally meet you. I sat down and told her what had happened with Philip and Renata. I told her about the deed, the realtor, the Maple Ridge pamphlet. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she turned her screen to face me and walked me through everything Walter had built. The commercial properties, the brokerage account, the bonds, the rental income that had been depositing quietly into a separate account for 2 years since his death, untouched, waiting. Your son and his wife? They don't know any of this exists, Sylvie said. No, I said. And the house they're trying to get you to sign over is not their house, I said. She nodded slowly. Walter was very clear in his instructions. This estate is structured specifically to protect you. There are provisions. If you're subjected to undue influence or coercion, we have grounds to act immediately. She paused. What would you like to do, Cecile? I thought about Philip's face when he slid that deed across my table, the way he wouldn't quite look at me. I want my home, I said, and I want my son back, if that's still possible. Sylvie brought in a colleague named Arthur Tan, an estate attorney who worked with the trust. Together we started making a plan. 2 weeks after my visit to Hargrove Trust, Philip and Renata came to the house again, this time with their attorney, a young man named Devin Cho, who had the slightly too confident energy of someone who'd never met a 68-year-old woman who'd read every page of a legal document before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. They sat at my dining room table. Renata opened her folder. Devin set out the deed again, and a health directive alongside it, a document claiming I was showing early signs of memory impairment and recommending a legal guardian be appointed to handle my affairs. I looked at my son. Do you believe that? I asked him. That I'm not capable of managing my own life? He opened his mouth. Renata spoke first. It's not about capability, Cecile. It's about making sure you're protected. From what? I asked. She didn't answer. I reached into the folder I'd brought to the table and set down a single page. A letter from Arthur Tan on Hargrove Trust letterhead, stating that I was represented by counsel, that any transfer of property signed under duress would be subject to immediate legal challenge, and that a full accounting of the estate's assets had been filed with the appropriate authorities. Devin Cho looked at it. His expression shifted. I'm not signing anything, I said. Not today, not next week, and if this continues, my attorney will be in contact with yours. Renata's composure cracked, just at the edges. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you. Then help me, I said. Come over for Sunday dinner. Call me on days that aren't holidays. Ask me what I want instead of arranging it without me. Philip was very still. You can see yourselves out, I said. The pot roast is mine. They left without another word. Devin Cho gathered his papers quickly and didn't make eye contact on the way out. That night, for the first time in months, I slept well. But it didn't end there. These things rarely do. Renata, I learned through Arthur, had gone to the county courthouse and requested documents related to my property. Title records, tax filings, anything public. She was looking for leverage. When she didn't find what she was looking for, she went further. She hired someone to pull financial records through channels I still don't fully understand, and somewhere in that process she got hold of the name Hargrove Trust. She put together enough of the picture to know Walter had left more than a house. Arthur called me on a Thursday morning. She's requested a meeting, he said, at Hargrove Trust. She wants to bring her attorney and discuss what she's calling Emily's rightful inheritance. Philip's name, I said. Yes. She's arguing that Walter's estate should have been disclosed in full during probate, that the trust was structured to deprive Philip of assets he's entitled to as a surviving heir. I knew enough by then to know that was legally thin. Walter's trust had been set up properly, reviewed by attorneys, filed correctly, but thin arguments can still cost you time and money and peace of mind, and Renata knew that. Set up the meeting, I said. I dressed carefully that morning. A gray wool blazer I'd bought for Walter's retirement dinner. A pearl pin he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A woman who knew where she stood. Arthur met me in the lobby of Hargrove Trust. Sylvie was already in the conference room with 2 colleagues. Renata arrived with Devin Cho and a second attorney, a woman named Patricia Holt, who was older and sharper and clearly the one Renata had brought in for this particular fight. Philip walked in behind them. He looked like he hadn't slept. We took our seats. Patricia Holt began with a prepared statement about the nature of marital assets and the obligations of full disclosure during estate proceedings. She was precise and polished, and she spoke for 6 minutes without looking up from her notes. When she finished, the door opened. It was the bank manager, the man I'd seen in passing when I first came to Hargrove Trust 2 weeks earlier. I hadn't known his name then. I knew it now. Charles Whitmore. He'd been with Hargrove for 22 years, and he'd been Walter's primary contact for the last decade of my husband's life. He stopped when he came through the door. He looked across the conference table and his face went completely still. "Is that her?" he said quietly, not to anyone in particular, just out into the air. Renata frowned. Philip looked up. Patricia Holt paused mid-reach for her water glass. Charles Whitmore crossed the room without another word, came directly to my side of the table and offered his hand. "Mrs. Cecile," he said, and his voice was not the voice of a bank manager conducting a meeting. It was the voice of someone returning something long held. "Walter used to talk about you every single time he came in. Every single time." Renata said, "I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of—" "I know," Charles said. He straightened, professional again, and took the seat at the head of the table that had apparently been left for him. "I've been briefed on what's been brought to this institution today, and I think there are some things that need to be said clearly." He looked at Patricia Holt. "This trust was structured and executed correctly. We've had it reviewed by 3 independent attorneys in the last 2 weeks. There are no grounds for a claim of improper concealment." Patricia Holt began to respond. Charles held up a hand, politely but without hesitation. "What I'd also like to say," he continued, "is that Walter Ashby sat in this building every 6 months for 10 years. He asked us every time whether his wife would be taken care of. Not his estate, not his assets, his wife." He looked at Philip then. "He was proud of you. He said that often. But he was very clear that this," he gestured toward the papers on the table, "was not what he had in mind." The room was completely quiet. Philip's eyes were red at the edges. He wasn't looking at Renata. "I think we should take a recess," Patricia Holt said finally. During the break, I stood by the window in a small anteroom while Arthur reviewed notes beside me. After a few minutes, Philip appeared in the doorway. He didn't have his attorneys with him. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking like the boy he used to be, the one who'd come to find me when something went wrong and didn't quite know how to say so. "Mom," he said. I waited. I didn't know about the health directive. Renata had it drafted. He paused. "I should have asked. I should have looked at everything she gave me before I brought it to you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She said. He stopped. Started again. "She made it sound like you weren't managing, like we were doing the right thing." I thought about what to say for a moment. Outside the window, the Columbus skyline was gray and ordinary and exactly as it had always been. "Your father worried about this," I said. "Not you, specifically. But this, someone getting between us, that's why he did what he did." Philip rubbed the back of his neck. "How much did he leave you?" "Enough," I said. "More than enough, and it's mine, Philip. I'd like you to understand that." He nodded, slowly. "I do," he said. "I think I lost track of that, of what was yours." "You were letting her lead," I said. I didn't say it harshly. It was simply what had happened, I know. He looked at his shoes. "I'm sorry, Mom." Those words, simple, unornamented, did something to the knot I'd been carrying in my chest for months. They didn't undo anything, but they opened a door. "We'll work on it," I said. "Both of us." When we returned to the conference room, Patricia Holt announced that her client wished to withdraw the claim. Renata sat with her arms crossed and didn't look at me. She signed what needed to be signed. She and Philip left separately. Philip paused at the door and looked back at me, and I gave him a small nod that I meant as a beginning. On the drive home from Columbus, I pulled off the highway at a rest stop and sat in my car for 10 minutes, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel what I was feeling without moving through it too fast. Relief. Exhaustion. Something that might have been grief, though I wasn't sure yet what for. And underneath all of it, something steadier. Something that felt like Walter. In the months that followed, I made decisions I'd been putting off for 2 years. I called a financial advisor, someone Sylvie recommended, and I sat down for the first time in my life and looked clearly at what I had and what I wanted to do with it. It turned out I had opinions, strong ones. I kept the house. I also learned around that time that Charles Whitmore had taken a particular interest in my situation beyond professional obligation. I understood why when he told me the story over coffee one afternoon at the trust offices. In 1987, he'd been 19 years old and working his first part-time job at the reference desk of the Ashford Public Library. He'd been struggling. His father had just left, his mother was working 2 jobs, and he'd been seriously considering dropping out of his associate's program at the community college. A woman had come to his desk one afternoon with a stack of books about small business accounting and asked for his help finding additional resources in the system. They'd talked for an hour. She'd mentioned in passing that she'd taken business courses at night while working full-time. That it was hard but worth it. That the library had been her classroom for years. She'd said, and he'd remembered this specifically because it had landed somewhere deep, that the people who kept going when it was hard were the people who decided they were worth the effort. He'd gone back to school the following semester. The woman's name, he'd found out later from the librarian who knew everyone, was Cecile Ashby. I had no memory of it. I had worked at that library for 4 years and talked to hundreds of people. But Charles Whitmore had carried it for 37 years. You probably saved my career, he told me. I probably just needed help finding the microfiche, I said. He laughed, a real one, unguarded. That too. I thought about Walter's letter. Everything I need comes back around. He hadn't written that, but it was what he meant. It was always what he meant. I won't tell you things became easy after that. Philip and I had months of careful, sometimes awkward conversations, the kind where you're rebuilding something rather than just repairing it. Renata and I were civil. That was enough for now, and I was honest with myself about that. What changed was the quality of the quiet. The house wasn't lonely in the same way anymore. I'd started a small reading group through the library. 4 women, sometimes 5, who met on Thursday evenings. I was the oldest. I was also, it turned out, the one with the most opinions about the books. No one seemed to mind. One evening, a woman in the group, a retired social worker named Dorothea, who was 64, and had recently been through her own version of what I'd been through with her adult children, asked me how I'd gotten through it, what had helped. I told her about Walter's letter, about Sylvie, about Charles Whitmore and the strange circle of a small kindness. Dorothea listened, then said quietly, I didn't have a Walter. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The following spring, I spoke with Arthur Tan and Sylvie about using a portion of Walter's estate to fund something specific, a legal assistance program for older women navigating financial abuse and coercion from family members. Not a foundation with my name on it. Something quiet and functional the way Walter had done everything. Attorneys on retainer, counselors. A number you could call. Sylvie said Walter would have approved. I said I knew. What I want you to understand, if you've stayed with me this long, is that I didn't win because I was clever, or because I had resources, or because everything fell into place at the right moment, though some of that is true. I won because I didn't sign that paper. That's it. That was the whole turning point. Saying I need time when someone was counting on me not to. Asking for my own attorney when someone had decided I didn't need one. Refusing to believe the story they were telling about me, that I was diminished, that I was a burden, that the most dignified thing I could do was step quietly out of my own life. Walter had spent 20 years building me a safety net, but the first thread of it was the one I had to hold myself. I still rise at 6. I still have my coffee in the same blue mug, chipped now at the handle, but I don't see the point of replacing it. The tomatoes came back this year better than last year. I'm not sure I know why. My grandsons visited last month and the older one, who is 9 and solemn in the way some children are solemn, asked me if I missed Grandpa Walter. Every day I told him. He thought about this seriously. Does it stop? He asked. No, I said, but it changes. It turns into something you can carry. He seemed to find this acceptable. He went back to his book. I stayed at the kitchen table a little longer, watching the morning light on the garden, feeling the ordinary weight of a life that was still, despite everything, mine.